So, when you hear the word history, what pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's probably this image of a big, dusty old book, right? Just a finished story full of names and dates we're supposed to memorize. But what if that's not it at all? What if history is actually something alive, something messy, and way more complicated? You've probably heard this famous line. It just perfectly nails that feeling, doesn't it? The idea that the past is this foreign country. A place we can look at, we can study, but we can't touch. It's all done, the landscape is set, the map is already drawn for us. Okay, but here's where it gets interesting. What if that country doesn't have a map? What if we're the ones still trying to chart it out? And that's really the heart of what we're going to talk about today. History isn't some book you just read cover to cover. It's more like a cold case that needs solving, and it is packed with clues, contradictions, and a ton of mysteries. All right, so let's just dive right in and start chipping away at this idea that history is one single fixed story. Because, a lot of the time, what we think of as history in our day-to-day lives, it's actually a totally different beast. What we're often dealing with is something called social memory. Think of it as a shared story that pulls a group together and gives it a sense of identity. A great example is the story of the Edwardian suffrage movement. I mean, that's not just some old tale about the past, right? It's a powerful origin story for the modern women's movement. It gives it a sense of purpose and unity right now, today. And right there, that's the key difference. Social memory is all about simplifying things, bringing people together. It confirms the stories we like to believe about ourselves. But real historical inquiry, it does the exact opposite. It's all about digging deeper, asking those tough, uncomfortable questions. And yeah, it often totally messes up the neat and tidy stories we've been telling. Yeah, this whole reliance on tradition can be a real trap. It can make us think that things have always been the way they are right now. A perfect example, the British monarchy. You look at all those ancient traditions, and guess what? A whole bunch of them were basically made up in the 19th century. They were specifically designed to make the monarchy look grander and more timeless than it actually was. So, okay, if our collective memory can be this huge trap, how do we get out of it? How does a historian actually sort through all the myths to get to something that's, well, closer to the truth? This, my friends, is where the real detective work kicks in. Honestly, the best way to think about a historian is like a detective on a cold case. I mean, the events are long over, the trail has gone cold, but the clues are absolutely everywhere. They're just scattered around waiting for someone to come along and piece it all together. And you've got to see their toolkit. It's huge. We're not just talking about dusty old official documents sitting in an archive. No way. A historian uses everything they can get their hands on. Private letters, court records, paintings, heck, even novels. Why? Because every single piece gives you a slightly different angle, a different voice speaking to you from the past. Just look at this engraving of the old St. Paul's Cathedral. This is so much more than just a pretty picture. It's an absolutely vital clue. See, it's one of the very few ways we can actually see what London looked like before the Great Fire of 1666 just wiped it off the map. It's literally a snapshot of a world that is completely gone. And private documents? Oh, they can be even more revealing. Get this, the diary of Prime Minister Gladstone. It wasn't just about politics. The man used a secret code to write about his private life, including some really personal stuff. It gives us this unbelievably intimate look inside the mind of a top Victorian leader. Wild, right? But then you have to ask, what about all the people who couldn't write, who didn't leave behind any records? Well, that's where something called oral tradition becomes absolutely essential. It's about listening to the stories passed down from generation to generation. They call it the heritage of the ears. It's how historians can start to piece together the pasts of entire communities that the official history books might have just forgotten. Okay, so the historian has collected all these different clues. They've got a whole box full of puzzle pieces, but how in the world do they go from that messy pile to a clear picture of the past? Well, it's about way more than just collecting facts. It's really about building a narrative. And this is the central challenge, right? Every single source is incomplete. Every witness is biased in some way. So the big question is, how do you take all these flawed, broken fragments and actually reconstruct a world that's gone forever? How do you make the past come alive again? Well, the answer is this really cool combination of two key skills. First, you've got rigorous critical analysis, where you question every single piece of evidence. And then you have something that's just as important, imaginative empathy. Now, when we say historical empathy, it's not about feeling sorry for people or judging them. Not at all. It's about trying to actually step into their shoes, to see the world through their eyes, with their values and beliefs, not ours. That's the only way we can begin to understand why they did the things they did. This quote here really gets to the heart of it. Historians are trying to trace how millions of tiny individual actions over a long period of time eventually solidify into these massive institutions. Think about something like slavery. It didn't just pop into existence overnight. It was built choice by millions of people. And here's the flip side. Just as actions can build institutions up, new actions can challenge them and eventually tear them right back down. So here's the crucial takeaway. A historian is not just a storyteller. They're actually making an argument. The way they put the evidence together, the narrative they choose to build, none of that is neutral. It's a deliberate act of interpretation. It's their specific take on what went down and why it mattered. Which, of course, brings us to the big one. Why does any of this matter? Who cares about all this historical detective work? Well, it matters because once you understand how the past is actually put together, it gives you a totally new and powerful way to look at your own world, right here and now. Okay, let's make this real. Let's apply this to a debate that's happening right now. We hear the phrase traditional family roles thrown around all the time, right? And the assumption is always that these roles are ancient, timeless, unchanging. But are they really? Well, if you take even a quick peek at the historical evidence, the answer is a big, fat no. This guy here, William Cobbett, was a journalist, and back in 1830, he wrote about being a super hands-on dad, juggling his work and the baby. And that was pretty common for his time. That whole idea of the distant Victorian father that we think of as the ultimate tradition, that actually came later. It was a reaction against this earlier, more involved style of fatherhood. And that, right there, is the real power of learning to think like a historian. It shows you that all the things we just assume are normal and take for granted, family structures, our national identities, social roles, none of it is natural. They're all human creations, things we built over time, and they are always changing. History gives us perspective. It proves that just because things are a certain way now, doesn't mean they have to be that way forever. And once you grasp that, it has some pretty powerful implications for all of us, living right now. Because if history isn't some finished story we just read, but instead it's a story that's constantly being written, well, that means the world we live in wasn't inevitable. It wasn't destined to be this way. It was built by the choices real people made, day after day. So that leaves us with one last, really important question. What choices are we making right now? What clues are we leaving behind for the historians of the future to find?